Hello. I'm going to do a brief discussion on billing and, well, essentially records keeping and how to approach records keeping with me or my records keeping. First of all, it's not very good. Um, I'll often go 4 or 5, 6 days without writing down lessons. Then I have to go to my calendar where I write down everything down and try to remember who was there and who wasn't. Um, it's really hard to make a general thing that's going to not just work for this spring, but work for year-round billing and year-round records keeping and any kind of contingencies or idiosyncrasies or weird flukes that might happen now and then. The main thing I would say is mainly watch for formula errors and an extra digit here or there. I've only done this twice ever in the last 10 years that I know of since I've been using Excel. Every once in a while, Excel will change its formula for no reason that I can figure out. So I'll look at a bill, and even halfway through a line of lessons, my coaching rate per hour will have changed from whatever $30 an hour to $50 an hour without me having done it. I've never quite understood how it does that, but Excel occasionally messes up like that. And I really only notice because occasionally I get a 30-minute or 60-minute lesson with someone, and I happen to notice that, with that simple math, that it's a little off. As I said twice, I've noticed that I put a zero. I know for a club once, and this was 2.5 years ago, I put a zero on a hundred. I had a 100-minute lesson, made it a 1,000-minute lesson, which when you got to the total, ended up making a $200 difference in the bill or something like that. And just casually perusing it, after the person I submitted to mentioned that it was I made a mistake. I saw it within 2 seconds of looking at the bill, and I know that happened once about 12 years ago too, where I think I charged someone for a 600-minute lesson instead of a 60-minute lesson, and somehow didn't. I used so many bills in a row, it didn't trigger in when I saw the end of the line or the total on the end of the bill, which it usually would. Usually does. I mean, I probably do those mistakes on a regular basis and just catch 99% of them. The other main thing is, I know in one club I worked in, I don't currently work in, and I haven't worked in a long time. I know there occasionally are parents up in the stands who I guess have nothing better to do than actually have a stopwatch and a pad of paper, and they actually time all your lessons and then double check that with your bills, and. I had one parent come and complain. She had done this. She had created a notebook. This was probably 20 years ago. She had complained that I had overbilled her for a couple days, and I knew she kept the notebook, so I asked to see her notebook, and sure enough, yeah, I charged her for a 15-minute lesson a couple days when her daughter had a 13-minute lesson. But what she failed to note to me, and even to herself when I pointed it out, that I occasionally billed her for a 15-minute lesson when her kid got an 18-minute lesson. So it ended up, over a period of weeks, months, years, it ends up evening out to be about the same thing. I'm not going to go down minute to minute. I really only know one coach that does that. And for a while, I had a timer that I had on my shoulder that used to count down from 15 minutes and would bing and then restart 15 minutes so I get a more accurate count. But as I said in one of my previous videos, if I'm in the middle of accomplishing something at the 15-minute mark, I'm going to finish that if it takes another minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and then go on to the next lesson. So, the 15 minutes are all generally approximations. The other thing I've been doing recently is if I have 2 or 3 people on a session, well, let's say I had 2 people on a session, and I know I was there for 45 minutes, I'll just divide the time between the 2 people. Again, if I'm on there for a 45-minute lesson, maybe I gave 20 to one and 25 to the other. But over time, I'm going to be aware of that. And wow, the moving screen is really making me nauseous. I wonder if I can get rid of that. How do I set this up so I can get rid of that? I don't know how. I have to turn it upside down. Yeah, that sort of worked. again, over time, it ends up working out. And I kind of notice if I'm shorting someone after a couple weeks, and then I'll start trying to lengthen their lessons for a couple weeks, so it all ends up balancing. But usually, most nights, it ends up working out okay. Now, I don't even sometimes note when I have a group lesson. For a while, I was charging more for group lessons, which we're supposed to do, but it just became a clerical nightmare, so I stopped doing it. More per hour. It ends up being less because you have more kids in the lesson, but more per hour. I just don't do that anymore. So if I have 2 kids in a 45-minute lesson, well, it doesn't work that way. It works better if I have 2 kids for a 60-minute lesson. I'll just charge them each for a 30-minute lesson. I'll do the math myself in my head without writing it down. So if you happen to notice that your kid was in an hour lesson, I only billed you for a half hour. That's why it ends up being the exact same. The other error I see occasionally, quite often, is I'll get dates wrong. I know occasionally, this hasn't happened in a while, but I know I get a complaint from one mother who was double checking dates and noticed that the entire bill I gave her, the dates were wrong for when her daughter skated. And we ended up going to the calendar because I didn't know what she was talking about. And it turns out I had made one of the months have 31 days instead of 30. So the next month, every single bill was off by 1 day. And once I pointed that out, I don't know why she couldn't figure this out for herself, but her daughter skated 3 days a week, and Monday, Wednesday, Saturday, and the dates were evenly split. Monday, Wednesday, Saturday. It just so happened that they were all off. They were all plus 1 day. So instead of the 1st, the 3rd, and the 6th, it was the 2nd, the 4th, and the 7th. So again, as I said, my records keeping is lousy. I personally don't think it matters. Even when coaches choose their rates, it's not based on any set criteria. Basically, coaches decide their own rates, so it's all kind of an estimation game. So as long as you're getting in the ballpark of the right area, I'm really unconcerned about whether every minute, every date, every hour is exactly right. Totally unconcerned. And usually to make sure that there's no errors, anytime I write something down in my lesson plan, that is, I have a kid's name and I write down 8 dates, and then I do a bill after 8 lessons have gone by, and then I cross it out once I do the bill. So you can see I got a couple here at the bottom that are due for bills that I haven't done yet. Occasionally a date or a number is illegible though, so if I can't tell if it's a 25 or a 45-minute lesson, I'll give the 25-minute lesson. And I had, just for curiosity, I had a coach say, well, you must lose a lot of money that way. So one month I kept, this was in Labrador, where I had to be there the whole time because I was the only coach on the ice, so the session couldn't run without me. I added up the end of the month how many minutes of lesson time I charged for and how many minutes I was actually on the ice, and there was about a 2.5 hour difference between the two. I had lost out on 2.5 hours of lessons, which isn't a ton. It's like about $100, but if I'm missing $100 a month, 12 months a year, it ends up adding over the course of 20 years to be a fair amount of money. I don't feel like doing that math in my head. The other thing I tend to do, unless I know that there was a time crunch on the day and I started exactly when the session started and ended exactly when the session ended, I will usually, if it's a 50-minute session, I'll charge for 45 minutes of lessons. If it's an hour and 50-minute session, I will charge for an hour and 45 minutes lessons. I generally shave down 5 minutes on almost every session. And most of the time I am there the whole time. Now spring's a little different because I have overlapping sessions where I'll often leave one early and come to one late. And so I note the time that I'm with people. I know people might also note that I get the occasional bill. It doesn't happen very often, but they get the occasional bill where people have, a 30-minute lesson billed for 8 times in a row, and they're pretty sure that I stayed there for an hour a couple days, and maybe, there'll be no time where I came in for 10 minutes and left and charged for a half hour. But, I generally, if I'm doing a bunch of days in a row and my aim is to do a half hour, and every once in a while I know I skipped out 2 or 3 minutes early, then I'll let a couple of them run 10 or 15 minutes late. So again, it all averages out to the right amount. This is a terrible video. I don't think I can show this to anyone.